my God, are we live? Am I live on my channel finally at ESTEY'S Crime Maze for the first time? I think I am. I don't have the camera. I tried to flip the camera the other way around, which I understand, I think looks better on YouTube, but for some reason they wanted me to flip it this way. So here we are, my friends. Welcome, everyone. I hope over time we'll get a lot of people on my lives, not only watching, listening, but maybe participating, because I read your comments, everyone, or I certainly will try. Of course, I'm on other platforms as well. I've got a TikTok channel. You guys can check me out if you would at Jason Truth Authority. Hope you'll follow me if you enjoy my videos, of course, over there too. I've got numerous YouTube channels, but I'm really a crime junkie in the last, year and a half. And you know which crime case that I feel like I'm a junkie, like a lot of you out there? I'm following the IDAHO4 case. Yes! You know, this diabolical, wild, crazy, and we're supposed to believe a tragic case where, again, we're supposed to believe law enforcement, the FBI, that 4 young university students, these beautiful, young, vivacious university students, on November 13th, 2022, that they were stabbed to death. Yeah, that's the narrative that's been put out, folks, and it's unbelievable. Actually, I got to put my reading glasses so I can see you guys and gals in case comments come in. And it's not true. This is why I want to do the live today, everyone. As I said on my live on TikTok and Facebook, the students, I'm convinced now, it took me a while to come to this theory, and a couple other YouTubers have hopped on this theory as well, particularly Birdie over there on TikTok and Facebook, TikTok and YouTube. Check them out, everyone. But we subscribe to the theory that, no, the students are in fact alive. Yes, this was an absolute, it's a massive cover-up, and it's called an extraction operation. And I also a strategic operational PSYOP. Obviously conducted by the feds, right? Elements, big-time elements of the FBI with local law enforcement there in Moscow, Idaho, some of the local cops and city council officials with the university establishment. Yeah, they're all in on it, my friends. You've got a massive, massive cover-up. These are all lies, largely, to us, the public. Why? Why are they putting out this emotional PSYOP? Again, they want the public, you know, to have this palette of emotions, you know, going along with this emotional PSYOP. Well, it's because, everyone, it was a massive federal investigation going on, not just one, right? They had at least 2 to 3 parallel drug investigations going on. If you really look deeply into the lens of this investigation, what was really going on, my friends, it's all to do with drugs, man. It's to do with cartels. We'll call it often the C group on this for YouTube's sake, okay, everyone? And Birdie's talked about it as well. You've got the C group infested there in small towns of Moscow, Idaho, places like Eugene, Oregon, right, and all across the United States largely. You've got all these C groups operating, my friends, and they use gang members at times, or you've got the Aryan family, Aryan nation operating, you know, trafficking drugs as well, or the rugs, right? Again, YouTube. But this is a real reality, my friends, and yet none of the guilters, not one YouTuber that thinks that BrianKohberger did the crime, right? They believe law enforcement that his touch DNA was at the crime scene, and he stabbed to death all 4 healthy victims. BrianKohberger, unalived, all 4. Are you kidding me? A skinny BrianKohberger, and he did this in 12 to 15 minutes. And yet, you know, none of the YouTubers, they don't want to look at the drug angle. They don't want to even educate the public. This is shameful of them, in my opinion, everyone. They do not want to educate you on the public of the actual drug trafficking, these C groups operating in the likes of Moscow, Idaho. Why wouldn't you talk about it? Even if you think BrianKohberger was responsible for the crime, why don't you educate people on gang activity and get the investigations, how law enforcement actually investigate gangs and cartels? But they won't go there, my friends, and it's disgraceful in my opinion. And another example, you've got an this woman really is out to lunch. I mean, I respect her in some ways, but Jennifer Koffendorfer, ex-FBI. She's come out with a YouTube channel now, my friends, and she actually wants to convince you that she thinks that BrianKohberger could be or is the assailant in the Idaho 4. What a bunch of horse pucky. Jennifer, in my opinion, Jennifer Koffendorfer absolutely knows the truth, my friends. She knows. She has to know that BrianKohberger had nothing to do with the actual atrocities itself. As a matter of fact, I can guarantee you, my friends, with Jennifer Koffendorfer's position as ex-FBI, she knows that BrianKohberger was working for the feds. He's a crisis actor. Literally, he's a crisis actor, my friends. We don't even know if he's really actually in a prison cell. I know the rabbit hole goes deep, everyone, but I'm telling you, you've got to look, my friends. You can't go with just law enforcement, FBI's narrative put out through corporate media. It's been all largely lies, my friends. And I'm telling you, Ethan Chapman, remember, 20 years old, 6'4". We're supposed to believe that he was stabbed. No, he's alive. His girlfriend, Xander Canuto, who, by the way, Xander Canuto's stepmother, I think was Karen Northington or something. We know she was trafficking her into hardcore drugs big time. She was most likely an informant, my friends. Yes. And so we're supposed to believe that Xander Canuto was stabbed by this crazy one-off Ted Bundy and BrianKohberger, right? And then you've got the beautiful, vivacious as well, Kaylee Gonzalez, 21 years old. You've got Kaylee Gonzalez. You've got her best friend. They were like sisters, Madison Mogan, 21 years old. We're supposed to believe that somehow, and for some reason, BrianKohberger stabbed them as well. A quadruple homicide. Are you kidding me? And here's the thing, everyone. You got to be totally naive or moronic to actually believe this nonsense that Brian did this atrocity, because even the prosecution, right, finally had to admit this, and even corporate media have to admit there is no motive. And guess what? They had to admit there's no identifiable connection of BrianKohberger to the victims, right? He's got no identifiable connections to the family. He has no identifiable, and I've talked about this on my channel, my friend. He has no identifiable connection to the residents, and really even the community. The guy's from out of state at Washington State University. He didn't even go to Moscow, Idaho. This is why I get so excited, everyone. This is all part of the convenient narrative. The university establishment with the feds, they couldn't arrest somebody that actually went to Moscow, Idaho, or was in the fraternity, etc. No way. No way, my friends. Right? They had to make it sure that they had a crisis actor, I believe, somebody from out of state. This is reason, logic, common sense, my friends. And we'll talk about this in future videos, how this all went down, my friends. But I truly believe, just like Birdie does, that when you look at really what's been happening in this whole system, right? You've got literally the C groups, cartel members, in university infrastructure, infiltrated, right? Sort of, setting up their groups and members, whatever, trafficking rugs. You know what I'm trying to spell, drugs, right? And you've got literally FBI also in these university infrastructures, right? And they're actually setting up some of the students as informants to try to go after the higher ups, sometimes in the drug hierarchy, right? For the C groups. Doesn't that make sense, right? And this is happening, my friends, not just in small town Moscow, Idaho, which if you look at this case, it's absolutely happening, right? But it's going on all across, apparently, the United States in many, many of these universities. And if I ever get a chance to interview Birdie, which I hope, and I'd be honored and privileged if he would let me interview him. I know I'm only a new channel here on YouTube, but I got over 2,000 followers as well on TikTok. But whatever platform he wants, if he would agree for me to interview him, I think I could hopefully add some valuable information. I would tell Birdie with our audience that at these older universities, like a Moscow, Idaho University or Washington State University, they absolutely have the establishment, that is, they have a dossier on their students. It's like a control file. Think about like U.S. congressmen. You know, the deep state will often have blackmail, in other words, a control file on congressmen. Well, it's the same thing at some of these older universities, my friends. And you don't have to take my word for it. The great Dr. Shiva there in Massachusetts, Dr. Shiva, who ran to become president as an independent, Dr. Shiva, who's got a PhD from MIT, 4 degrees. He invented the email system at 14 years old. He's trying to start a bottoms-up global movement for truth, freedom, and health, he calls it, my friends. But I bring him up, and he's my buddy. He knows who I am. I'm hoping to interview him as well. But Dr. Shiva shows you, my friends, that older universities, I think he gave, it was either Yale or Harvard as an example, but they've got dossiers on their students, as he says. It's the same thing it would be at University of Idaho. It's a very old university. Same thing with Washington State. So the point being, you better believe law enforcement, my friends, FBI, university establishment, etc., they're going to have a dossier. They're going to know all about Brian Kohberger right from the get-go. And not only that, my friends, they would have groomed Brian Kohberger. The whole thing about him, you know, with his PhD in criminology, right? This professor or teaching criminology, it's a perfect cover story, my friends. I'm telling you, it's a perfect cover story. This is what the deep state establishment does. And I know this because I study UFOs and the black budget technology in the military industrial complex, and I study the deep state. I study the CIA, how they operate. Well, guess what? With that subject matter, the same thing. They use even professors at Harvard that add disinformation and lies, yes, about UFOs. They try to say they're extraterrestrial, again, with no evidence. But this is what they do, my friends. The older universities will use people in these positions at times for like crisis management to put out a certain narrative, often lies and misinformation, and so the public will absorb that and believe in this nonsense. It's the same thing I believe with Brian Kohberger, my friends. Believe me, the CIA, FBI, you know, the feds, in other words, they absolutely would have debriefed Brian Kohberger. They probably told Brian, look, we're going to do this operation. We're going to do an extraction operation. We're going to protect these students, you know, from a targeted, probably gang hit or from the C group, right? But we need you as a crisis actor. We need to arrest you. We need you as the lone wolf. And we're going to go publicly. You're going to be famous. You're going to get all this notoriety, right? But we know you're innocent. And ultimately, Brian, don't worry. You may have to spend a year or two or more in jail. We'll treat you good. You'll gain weight. You know, we'll get you off your heroin addict, drugs, right? And because we saw Brian Kohberger gain weight in jail, my friends. He's absolutely healthy now, right? He finally looks kind of strong. During the atrocities, he wasn't. He was strung out on drugs. How the hell could he stab to death unalive 4 people? It's ridiculous. Anyway, as I was saying, everyone, that's what they would have probably made the deal with Brian Kohberger. Look, we're going to arrest you. You're going to do some time in jail, but we'll treat you good. And then you're going to look like the hero, man. You're going to be found innocent, and or we're going to put you in witness protection, dude. We'll relocate you. You'll be fine. You'll be safe. Just live a low-profile life after that, just like the students, and you'll be fine. Again, everyone, please do not underestimate the deep state, how organized they are, how shrewd, and sometimes how evil they are. But I give credit to the feds in this case in the aspect that I think it was great that they did an extraction operation. They have protected those 4 students. But we, the public, my friends, it's up to us to figure this out, right? We've got to know the truth. Don't allow ourselves to be hoodwinked and lied to by corporate media. And we got to be careful, my friends, because as I said on my live, I believe on Facebook and or TikTok, you know, just like Bertie subscribes to this, that we're seeing it in the hearings, where if we're not careful, the elements of the FBI, it looks like the deep state, they want to circumvent potentially around legal proceedings, and potentially they can illegally get innocent people's DNA and set them up, you know, for crimes. I mean, again, everybody, some of these people are very evil. Look what they've done in the Brian Kohberger case, right? Doing the DNA, they did this IgG, right? They doubled the SNP profile from Othram Labs, right? Even Ann Taylor, the defense attorney for Brian Kohberger, she's been asking the judge and in the world, how the hell did they double the SNP size? And if you Google all this, my friends, you find out that if they double the SNP of a DNA profile, these are huge red flags. It shows that almost 100% that the DNA was manipulated. And I believe in no question, my friends, because BrianKohberger, he's not the assailant. He's literally like a federal agent. He's a crisis actor. Just look at the guy and look what's happened, everyone. And look the fact that all these drug investigations, all these drug busts that have since happened. You had a major drug bust, just before the atrocities. Remember, everyone? I forget exactly the date. And then you had a major drug bust shortly after the atrocity. What was it, a few months later, maybe a year later in Washington State, right, everyone? Look at how the drugs are being trafficked. And, I give credit to guys like Birdie and Jay Embry. They showed you, they've investigated some of the drug running. This is massive, my friends. I'm telling you, it's absolutely massive. The drug, the C groups, let's put it that way, right? And therefore, the federal drug investigations are massive as well. So don't think for a minute, my friends, this whole thing, don't think it's not a huge cover-up. And don't think that we're not being lied to by elements of the federal government task force, right? Don't think you're not being lied to by elements of FBI and CIA, because you are. You absolutely are, my friends, for this case. Because they want to cover up the drug investigation angles, my friends. Yes, they do. And they certainly don't want you to know that they've used a BrianKohberger, in my opinions, but I think the facts back it up. They don't want you to know that BrianKohberger, they've groomed him, he's working for the feds, and that they don't want you to know that, again, BrianKohberger is just a crisis actor. They need this lone wolf so corporate media could push and try to brainwash you that somehow BrianKohberger, even though he has no motive, that he killed all 4 students, stabbing them to death. I mean, it's just, you got to be so naive to allow yourselves to be brainwashed by corporate media. Again, everyone, many of you already know that corporate media lies, but I've still had many people that usually don't believe in corporate media. They say to me, well, Jason, you're nuts. BrianKohberger, of course he did the crime. And yet they don't have any direct evidence to point to it. And I tell them, well, you know what? If you already have doubts or you don't believe corporate media normally, why would you believe corporate media? And why would you believe the FBI? Why would you believe that these students were even unalived? Think about it. If they showed us crime scene photos, maybe you could start to believe the FBI, right? Maybe you could start to believe that these students were unfortunately brutally unalived. But no, my friends, not one crime scene photo has been leaked. Not one. Think about that for a moment. We'll talk about that in a sec. I just want to give, look for people on my live. This is my first ever live on YouTube, like for my own channel. I'm really excited, everyone. Fatima's on. She gives me a wave. I'm going to try to wave back to you. Pin a message. Let's see if I could pin a message to you. Not sure what that means. I'm going to have to get help from my niece one day on YouTube Live to see your messages, folks, if she'll help me out. Oh, no. Sorry, everyone. I'm trying to acknowledge Fatima and others to say hello. Let's see here. I don't know how to do it, folks. But I see your hand, Fatima. Thank you very much. And I see somebody else. Can't read that. I really appreciate this, everyone, because again, I think this is such an important case, and obviously it's a wild and crazy case, my friends. I mean, and you know what? If we get to the truth, if we really talk about what's been going on with these drug investigations in Moscow, Idaho, my friends, and places like Eugene, Oregon, and some of the drug hubs and the C cartels, etc., then we can really start to understand, my friends, what's been gone on in this case. Because that's exactly what it is, everybody. And we can hopefully stop a lot of our young university students, in this case, from getting their hands on drugs, on rugs. Okay, everyone? Because we got to understand, some of these C groups, as I said earlier, they'll use the fraternities as sort of, DRUGS hubs and trafficking. right? And they'll use, and they've infiltrated university infrastructure at times, some of these C groups. And the FBI is infiltrated as well because they're trying to catch some of the higher ups. And it's a big, huge RICO conspiracy, everybody. And some of the FBI, unfortunately, and probably city council officials as well, these guys are, and gals, they're getting rich, man, at times. They're getting a lot of money, like DRUGS. They're getting money under the table, my friends. Follow the money. And just like the university establishment, my friends, as I've always said in my videos, and many people have said it, reason, logic, common sense, in my opinion, the university establishment, my friends, they've been lying to you from day one. They do not want you to know the truth, that there was not one assailant. And these 4 students, they're not dead. They're not unalive somewhere or unalive. No, they're actually alive. They've been relocated. They're like protected witnesses. Hello, that's the real truth of this case, my friends. Okay, please understand that, in my opinions. And yes, they were targeted. You know, I'll give credit to the cops at the very beginning. They're in Moscow, Idaho. They told you the truth at the very beginning when they said, but you know, they didn't specify, but they said the victims were targeted. Yes, they were. They were targeted off either directly by the Aryan family, Aryan Knights, as Jay Embry has subscribed to, right? Or they were targeted by C groups. Think CARTEL, one of those groups, okay? Certainly those students, I believe, were targeted, one or more. And that's why, to the Fed's credit, I'll give them credit on this, my friends, I believe they went in very quietly, and Bertie subscribes to this theory as well. They went in quietly, and they extracted the students, my friends. There's precedent for this. You could Google, research all this for yourselves, everyone. And did you know this? Not only do you have extraction operations, and you can Google it, as I say, but as part of that, did you know legally, the deep state or the feds, you could say, they actually can legally create a violent scenario, a violent event. Yes, they could hoodwink the public, in other words, using, you know, media stations nowadays like News Nation, which is largely CIA, by the way, but anyway. And, you know, you got Ashley Banfield as the reporter, you know, putting out the narrative that, you know, Brian maybe he did the atrocity just for fame and all this nonsense. Excuse me, but no, so the feds, they can create a violent event to protect a confidential informant that he or she who has had their cover blown. Can I repeat that, my friends? This is exactly what I believe happened in the IDAHO4 case, okay? You had a confidential informant, maybe even more than one, probably that lived right there, 1122 King Road, in the house, okay, on November 13th, 2022, and probably lived there for some time. You know, the students lived there for a couple of years, I guess, or maybe a year or more. But anyway, you had at least one confidential informant. And actually, it could have been the 2 surviving roommates. Even Bertie thinks that Bethany Funk, one of the 2 surviving roommates, and you had Dylan Morrison, he's convinced that Bethany is probably the informant. I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, she probably is, my friends. And you could have had Kaylee Gonzalez. She could have been an informant. She could have been, you know, she was very intelligent, very shrewd, like some ways like her father. She could have been, you know, snitching. She could have had inside information. Or it could have been a crypto scheme as well. I mean, the rabbit hole goes deep, everybody. But either way you look at it, reason, logic, common sense, at least one of the 4 students and or surviving roommates, they were confidential informants. At least one confidential informant, they probably had their cover blown in some way. Let's say if Bethany is the confidential informant, her cover could have been blown because, you know, reason, logic, common sense, somebody like Kaylee Gonzalez or Madison Mogan, Ethan Chapman or Xander Canuto, or maybe all 4 in the house, they found out that Bethany was a confidential informant. Okay? So if that's the case, my friends, if you have a confidential informant that had their cover blown, what do you think the feds are going to do? Do you think they're going to stand by idly? No. They know right away that some of those C groups and or Aryan family, the Aryan Knights, they're going to try to get epic retribution, and they're going to go hard. at trying to get somebody who's a valuable asset like that, but somebody that's snitched, in other words. Okay. And so you're going to have, the feds, part of the government, they're going to try to go at it hard too to protect those, say in this case, the 4 students that were being targeted. Absolutely, my friends. I think that's what happened. And from there, again, you had a quiet extraction operation that night, November 13th, 2022. And I'm pretty sure if you use, again, reason, logic, common sense here, feel free to leave a comment again, everyone. I read them, especially after this live. I'll definitely read them. I don't know if I can see comments coming in. Somebody says, good day from Cape Town. There's a message. And they call themselves Others Money. Thank you for the comment. I really appreciate that. Hello. How many of you have been following the Idaho 4 case, and how many of you are new to the case? Again, I go by ESTEY'S Crime Maze. I assume many of you that have hopped on to my crime channel here, hopefully many of you are already familiar with the Idaho 4 case, but hopefully I can provide some new tantalizing revelations that you may not be aware of, and how it all went down, really, my friends, and how this is, again, a massive, massive cover-up, in my opinion. This was a strategic tactical psyop from the get-go. This was not just an overnight psyop, by the way, everyone. This has been in place and organized for several years, just like Birdie surmises. The window of time frame that we're talking about, and ultimately, again, an extraction operation where the students were taken that night, and now they've been relocated under, their confidential informants and protected witnesses. This took place over about 5 years, right? At the very end of 2019, the beginning of 2022, at the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020 to 2025, recently, my friends, okay? This is not just something that happens over a year or two, because we know one of the C groups, one of the major cartel groups, apparently one of the leaders, they were taken out and they were investigated. That doesn't happen overnight, my friends. And often that doesn't even take just a year or two. It'll take at least several years, my friends, because we know many of the C groups, if not all of them, they're very, very well protected, well insulated, right? So that's why you got the feds often working overtime. They're collecting all their informants, trying to get information to get the higher ups in these C groups, right? Anyway, I think hopefully I'm making a lot of sense to you, everyone. I've been diving in this case. It's fascinating, I'll tell you. Like I said, Others Money says, where can we send donations? Oh my God. Thank you so much for saying that, Others Money. Now I feel even worse because I didn't even think about actually today setting up a donation page on my first live. I would love to do that. I certainly could use the help, and I definitely want to get better equipment, etc. And I could use help in grocery money, etc. But I won't go on about that. But so I really appreciate that, Others Money. I could only ask you nicely. You've given me a lot of hope and optimism, hopefully for the future. I will get help, hopefully receive help from a friend or family member, and eventually to set up a donation page on here. I really appreciate it. Others Money, if you're willing to, you could connect with me privately, either through my email, or you could reach out first on Facebook to me, if you don't mind, on Messenger. On my Facebook, I'm at Jason Estey. Last name is Estey. Or send me a comment here on YouTube and we can communicate, and I'll guide you in the right direction. And that would be great if you could help me out. I really appreciate that, buddy. I'm sorry I don't have, again, a donation page just simply set up for you. So again, I can't even I can't show my appreciation. I can't show my appreciation enough, even for the consideration, let alone hopefully I can receive that help from you if I could do my part with you. Okay. Anyway, I'm so wound up, my friends. This case, again, I think it's very, very important potentially for the future of American citizens, possibly for Canadian citizens as well, because again, it goes back to the DNA. We've seen in the hearings, my friends, the FBI, they keep saying, well, they got to BrianKohberger by a tip. Everybody's been wondering, how did they get to BrianKohberger? And Ann Taylor, defense attorney, has been asking that for so long now, my friends. And then finally, the judge, many call him his real name's Judge Hitler, but many people are calling him Judge Hitler. But Judge Hitler had a private meeting with Ann Taylor and the prosecution about this tip, what the hell that means. Well, just like Bertie sort of talked about, they're probably discussing the DNA, my friends. The FBI are trying to find a way possibly to do loopholes to try to get people's DNA at times. They could set up innocent people possibly by, they could go on just like they did with BrianKohberger apparently. They illegally went on sites, Ancestry DNA, right? Collecting DNA. And so God forbid, if you're on a site and you're trying to find out a family member that wanted to find out their DNA through Viking heritage or what have you, what happened to BrianKohberger case? These guys used IgG. They went to BrianKohberger's parents' house, right? Smashed in his door. They tried to con you that they suspected BrianKohberger did the crime. Again, they bash in his parents' house where BrianKohberger lived in Pennsylvania and they actually went to his trash to get DNA. It's crazy, my friends. We got to be very careful. And if you have any doubts, my friends, just look at history. Look in the last decade or so, right? We've had at least a handful of events, 5 to 10 events, major events, where elements of the feds, the deep state, they've tried to change laws. Sometimes, and not in a good way. They've tried to do things illegally and try to make it legal, okay? If you know what I'm saying. So we've got to be very careful, particularly when it comes to DNA. Yes, there are times for the feds to get DNA, especially when they're doing it the right way, but there's a lot of questions, especially with the legal proceedings in this BrianKohberger trial, I believe, my friends. And again, we want to protect our children, family members, and future generations, especially if they're innocent people, right, from having illegally their DNA taken and or being set up. And again, I'm telling you, my friends, BrianKohberger, he's working for the feds, man, in my opinion. He's not a lone wolf. He's not an assailant. He had no physical ability to really commit this atrocity. Even Ann Taylor, for heaven's sakes, and the defense team are showing you that the guy's got autism. When have you heard somebody do a quadruple homicide that's got autism? Come on, folks. And the guy was a skinny heroin addict. And he's got no motive. And he has no identifiable connection, as I said, to the family members, the residents, the victims. And he's from out of state, man. Does this make any sense to you? Do you really believe that a BrianKohberger did this? And even if you do, everyone, please try to absorb some of the information that I've given to you today. Do your own research. Look at the drug angle. Just look at a different theory as a possibility here, everyone. Look at the real reality of what goes on in these small towns. You've got major, major drug investigations, right? You've got C groups, CARTEL. You got those groups that are in university infrastructures often, right? They're trafficking. They've got, they're trafficking from dorm rooms, DRUGS, right? You've got the FBI. They're infiltrated at these university infrastructures and or in the frats too, using informants, right? To get to some of the C groups. It just goes on and on and on. Don't you think when you look at it that way, that there's a connection here with what went down at 1122 King Road on November 13th, 2022, my friends. And just look at corporate media. You can't trust them. And again, my friends, the proof is we have no, if these, all 4 students, if they were really unalived, I can't be any more clear, I don't think here, my friends. If all 4 students were unalived, we would receive some sort of crime scene photos. And why do I say that? Because I know I don't want to sound morbid, but crime scene photos, but because corporate lamestream media, my friends, we know they have all the money and they have the connections, they have the resources. In high profile cases, you almost always see at least one crime scene photo. I mean, come on. Am I not right in that, everyone? But we haven't had any. And then and then connect all the dots, right? You've got all the gag orders, all the secrecy. It's not just a coincidence, my friends. And I don't believe in coincidences, right? again, my friends, I'm telling you, this was, I'm convinced, a strategic operational psyop. And before we go today, everyone, gosh, I hope others money will reach out to me again, because I could really use some donations. I really appreciate that generosity, free spirit, others money. I wish I could give you a like on here, but I don't know how to do it. By the way, others money, if you reach out to me on Facebook, like I described, the one account I would ask you if you want to reach out to me is at Jason Estey, and I've got a picture. It's with my amazing sister, by the way, and she's wearing the Canadian Bill of Rights shirt. But anyway, and hopefully you'll reach out to me again on YouTube here, and we'll set that up. But no, what was I saying, everyone? Oh, you know what a psyop is? Some of you may be asking, and I hope you'll share this video. Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask you at the very beginning of the video, everyone, to remind you, if you enjoy my videos, I hope you subscribe to this channel. I want to take it to a whole new level. I've only got, what, maybe 70 subscribers or 65 or something, but it's a new channel. How do you spell?
Ingredients.
Ingredients, excuse me, everyone. INGREDIENTS. Ingredients.
Are you doing that live right now?
Yes.
So people just...
They heard you ask that. Anyway, but we're not showing you on camera. So, again, everyone, what is a psyop? Some of you may be asking that. Again, I hope you subscribe to my channel. If you enjoy my videos, please smash that like button, because it's good with the algorithms. Apparently, it helps get the videos out. Hit the bell icon. That does the same thing. And you get to be notified for future videos, okay? And if you leave me a comment, if you choose to, that also apparently helps with the algorithms, helping get the video out and ultimately to you guys and gals, okay? And I read your comments, appreciate the engagement, just like on here, all right? So there you go. Now, that being said, everyone, I defined a psyop many times in past videos and on other subjects. And I actually defined it in my speeches. I'm a public speaker. I was honored and privileged to do a lot of public speaking during COVID, actually, especially in my powerful country here in Canada. But a psyop is any activity, and I want you to think about the IDAHO4 case, please, everyone, when I mention this, okay? A psyop is any activity that is practiced mainly by psychological methods with the aim of elucidating or evoking a planned psychological reaction in another person. Yes. Another way of saying it is, it's when you take selected information and indicators to an audience to affect one's emotions, right? Value systems, belief systems at times, and or objective reasoning. Yes, okay, everyone? And we know the military are often fond of doing psyops, right? Same with law enforcement. Again, think of the IDAHO4, my friends. Cops, police, law enforcement, they will do psyops to try to usurp confessions. Or I believe in the IDAHO4 case, my friends, they, the feds, they conducted a psyop to have this lone wolf and BrianKohberger to try to make you think through corporate media that, oh, somehow BrianKohberger must have did this atrocity because we're being told that he drove, around and he must have went in the house and did this. It's just nonsense, everyone. He may have been driving in the neighborhood, but he didn't go in the house and do this atrocity. It's just ridiculous. Absolutely outrageous, in my opinion, everyone. No. And here's the good news. As I said earlier, my friends, all 4 students, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xander Canuto, Ethan Chapman, they are alive. They're just relocated. They're probably living a beautiful life in Puerto Rico right now. Mark my words. Or Mexico, I would guess. Actually, probably more, I would guess, Puerto Rico, maybe even Australia. And guess what, my friends? Here's another reason why we deserve the truth on on a lot of this. Because you got Kaylee Gonzalez's father. Remember, Steve Gonzalez, the one parent that's doing all the talking, basically, right? All the interviews. The other parents are almost completely hushed. They've only done very few interviews. They don't talk much, right? And my heart goes out to all the parents, my friends. Even though they're alive, the students, I believe, but the parents have gone through probably enormous stress, and they probably still are in some ways because, the students are far away. They've been relocated probably again through protective custody, but and protective witnesses. But Steve Gonzalez, my friends, I think this guy, he's pretty shady, in my opinion. I think he may have been involved in a crypto scam. I don't know for sure. But let me tell you something. This Steve Gonzalez, what he's not telling you, my friends, this guy we know is receiving many, many thousands of dollars from a lot of your public money, your taxpayers' hard-earned money. This guy's received, what, hundreds of thousands of dollars by now, him and his family, right? And yet what he refuses to tell you is that this money is going to go largely towards his beautiful daughter, Kaylee Gonzalez, and her new lifestyle. That she is alive, just in a different location, protected by the feds, the government. He's not telling you that, my friends. And that's not right, in my opinion. That's wrong. But I'll leave that up to you to decide what you think about that, my friends. I don't see how that's right. You? But I think that's the real reality of what's going on here, my friends. And Steve Gonzalez, just like Bernie thinks, he most likely signed a waiver eventually with those feds. How do you spell what, sorry? Cuticles. I think it's Cuticals. Cuticles. You're welcome. So, anyways, my friends, we're going to wrap up this live now. I really appreciate you listening and engaging with me. I also really, really appreciate others' money asking me where he can get donations, and I haven't been able to set it up on this live, but eventually we will, and I hope he'll ask me again. Anyway, and I've asked him to reach out to me, and either on here privately or Facebook you can do it, or if you ask me on YouTube after, if you ask me, excuse me, after this live others money, I can give you my email address, okay, too, buddy? Or maybe it's a woman, I'm not sure. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for caring about our human rights, our fundamental freedoms, because I believe, again, this IDAHO4 case, in a lot of ways, everyone, is very important in some ways for our human rights and to protect our fundamental freedoms here of what's going on and what elements of the deep state, want to try to accomplish, I believe, in the future, possibly trying to get DNA illegally at times. Anyway, I think I've said enough on this first live, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And we're going to do more lives, God willing, on the IDAHO4. I want to thank the YouTube engineers and everybody that is in charge of the company at YouTube for allowing me to use their platform. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can continue to do this, and hopefully I don't get censored or anything like that. And because I'm just telling it like it is, giving my opinions. But I think a lot of the facts back it up, everyone. And it's okay to have interesting speculation at times too. We're just, hopefully more of us are after the truth and not just, we shouldn't just be regurgitating what corporate media is telling us, right, everyone? And or elements of FBI law enforcement. There's a huge impetus for elements of FBI, as I said, CIA and the feds to try to cover this whole thing up, my friends, of what really transpired, okay? But again, us, the public, many of us, we deserve to know a lot of what the hell went on here. And again, I'm telling you, we deserve to know that these students are alive. They haven't been unalive, they are alive. Anyway, thanks for listening, everyone. Of course, I'm ESTEY'S Crime Maze. Till next time. Oh, and by the way, if any of you would like or would do it for me, please reach out to Birdie. Again, he uses TikTok and YouTube. Reach out to him, please. Tell him about me. Maybe pump up my tires. Tell him I'm articulate, an intelligent guy, and have charisma, and tell him, I'm pretty knowledgeable on the IDAHO4 case. I'm digging in as well, and that please tell him that I'm asking Birdie to do an interview with him. Allow me to interview him either here on YouTube or we'll figure it out on TikTok. I'd be honored to interview Birdie, and I think we can knock it out of the park. And anybody else who's knowledgeable on this case wants to do a live with me, I'd be more than happy to do that, hopefully, in the near future. Okay, let's bring more awareness to this case and get spreading the truth more. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye. Have a great day or beautiful morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Uh-oh, now I got to figure out how do I end the live. I've never done this before, folks. I'm going to first copy the link. I've copied the link, folks. And now, I don't know if I press the X to end the live. Well, I'm going to press an X and hopefully it works, folks. Till next time. Bye for now.